Welcome to the Business Model Sandbox, where leaders come to explore and test entire new business models, not just tweaks or incremental change to the way things work today, but entirely new ways to create, deliver, and capture value. I'm your host, Saul Kaplan. I'm the founder and chief catalyst here at BIF, the Business Innovation Factory. And each month I have the privilege and honor to speak to one of the world's leading thinkers and doers in the transformation space. Today, I'm really excited to welcome to the Business Model Sandbox my friend, Matthew Milan. Matthew is a crazy cool software designer. He's the founder and CEO of a firm in Toronto called Normative Design. These guys actually think that they can help us redesign our future. And so we're going to get at that. This is part of our continuing series of emerging technologies to enable our personalized medicine by design initiative. And I'm really excited to have this conversation with you. Matthew, welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Saul. Big fan and a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Vice versa. I've been watching your work and we've known each other a long time.
Yes.
I really love the way you think about software, so we're really going to get into it. First, did you actually design your first software interface when you were 6 years old?
I think it was actually 7, but yeah, I remember not having a computer and wanting a computer, and so my parents were both designers, and so for me, naturally, if I couldn't have a computer, I was going to design a computer, and all of a sudden I was designing interfaces and all kinds of other things, and I thought that was just natural, that you would just think about the way that people interacted with technology through screens and all those other things. So I got a very early start as a software designer. Maybe too early, but certainly no. I've been at it for a long time.
No, you have been. It's been so much fun to watch your journey. Not from the time you were 6 or 7, no. But certainly over the last 10 years since you formed Normative. Let's start from, we've all heard now, and it's been a while since this whole idea of software is going to eat the world. Yeah. You probably get this question a lot, but you have such a provocative and distinct view about software. Let's start there. Is software eating the world?
That's an interesting question. Software is definitely taking over a lot of things that people have historically done in the past, and that's generally what people do with technology. We add it to our world to make our lives easier, to make it more efficient, to make us able to do more things. I think the challenge when you talk about software eating the world is there's this implication in that statement that software is going to take over the existing world and replicate it in software. And historically, where we've received the most benefit from technology is that technology has been used to create new and better types of capabilities. And so I think this idea that software is eating the world is actually limited in terms of what it says. It doesn't suggest that it's going to create a better world, a better future for us. It just says software is going to replace the existing world with software. And I don't think that that's where we need to be going. So
I love and share that definition with you. But let's stick with the whole software eating the world thing, because not everyone shares our view about what software could actually do. So let's just, we won't admire this problem for much longer in our talk, but let's just put a finer point on it. Like, where are we today?
I'll put it this way, we're in a place where a significant portion of the work that people used to do has been replaced by software. Not all at once, but it's slowly been changing over the last 15 or 20 years. And we're in a situation now where I have a car where I don't drive the car, I drive with the car. And so increasingly it's becoming a situation where technology that was behind the scenes and taking over a lot of the mundane tasks is now coming back into the forefront and showing itself to us again. And for some people, that's very exciting, and for some people, that's a little frightening. And so software is really taking over the world in a lot of ways, and now it's time that we start to think about what our relationship looks like as it shows itself to us more.
I love that.
Makes sense?
I drive with the car. I've not heard that before. I mean, of course, we hear all the stories about autonomous vehicles and that the car's going to drive itself, and we're not going to have to drive, which is, I think, what scares a lot of people about software eating the world. Right?
Yeah, so maybe I can build on the car piece because my family got a new car a couple of years ago, and we're geeks, and my wife and I and the kids, and we wanted to get a car that had a lot of technology in it because that was an interesting thing for us to explore together as a family. And we came down to two choices, Tesla and Volvo. And it goes right to the name of how they express the technology. So Tesla calls its technology autopilot, and we've all heard about all the issues and challenges with autopilot and everything else. And Volvo calls its technology pilot assist. And they're fundamentally the same level of technology in autonomous vehicles. It's like a level 2, but the expectation that was set from a design perspective on Volvo's side is that you will participate in the act of driving the vehicle, you will be in control, it will assist you. That same technology as framed by Tesla is that it's going to drive for you. And that leads to people overestimating the capability of the technology. And that's actually what's really dangerous right now, is that not only is this technology surfacing itself in these new capabilities and everything else, but we're also doing a poor job of setting expectations around what we can actually expect in our relationship with technology. And so I love the language of assist versus auto, because it much more clearly suggests that you are going to drive in conjunction with that system rather than that system is going to drive for you, which is not the truth.
I love that. Let's talk about the definition that I share with you.
Yeah.
It's how we first connected.
Yes.
This notion about software as a capability.
Yes.
The power to do something, an extension of humanity.
Yes.
I drive with the car.
Yes.
Right? Talk about that a little bit more. What do you mean when you say software is a capability?
Right. So I'll explain it like this: software is a technology, and the relationship that people have with technology goes back thousands and thousands of years, and we have a history of using technology to better ourselves, our communities, and the types of outcomes we can get as society. So it's very difficult to look at humanity without technology as its partner. But in the past, the technologies that we used were so simple and so easy to understand that they weren't threatening. I like using the example of clothing. Clothing is one of my favorite examples of technology. Clothing started out 20,000 plus years ago as something that was highly protective, and then it became something over thousands of years that became more about creating capability. Clothing didn't just protect you from the environment, it allowed you to do things that you couldn't do, et cetera, et cetera. And then clothing became an expression of self. It became style. It became a representation of who you are. And when I look at where we're at in our progression of understanding our relationship with software, the technology, it's going from the basics to now this place where software can create capability for us to augment us, as the language goes, to give us superpowers, is often the language that gets used. But we need to think about pushing beyond that to how does technology and how does software allow us to express who we are. Every time people develop a technology and have a relationship with it, we go down the road of going from need to capability to expression of self or expression of identity. And it would be a shame to stop with software and algorithms and all these other things at the need perspective or the capability perspective. If we don't get to a place where it acts as something that allows us to show how human we are, we have not developed it as far as it can go.
One of the things we've talked a lot about is how software as a capability can enable new business models.
Absolutely.
And the importance of the context of the business model that a capability is in. I often talk about capabilities as the amino acids
Yes.
of a business model, and that most of innovation is about how we combine and recombine the parts,
Yes.
right, to change the business model. You've been on this idea for a long time. Talk about the context of capabilities within a business model to solve a challenge in the real world.
Right, and so the way I look at it is when you're doing innovation work, and specifically innovation work with software, the most interesting capabilities come where you can use software to augment a human capability. And so it's almost like a co-capability is where the most interesting work happens, because that is the creation of something net new. And that is then the novelty and the differentiation that becomes the grounds for truly innovative change in terms of impact or behavior or market. I think where a lot of innovation work in the software space falls short is that it doesn't really understand that the capability is supposed to create something new. It's not about the extension of the existing, it is about the creation of the new to solve a job or a need for an individual or a group. And where I think we need to continue to push and question ourselves is when we're doing this type of work, not to say, how can I take what we already do and make it a little bit better or a lot better, but how can I go and create something different? Because that different is often the wedge to open up a new environment for transformation. If you don't create something that bumps up against the existing way things work, you don't really have a strong chance for transformation. You're just expanding out the boundaries of the existing space you're in, if that makes sense. And so from my perspective, capability is really best developed with the mindset that we want to create a new and better capability rather than to extend the existing one. Otherwise, it's not really innovation, it's just incremental improvement. And I sit on the side of the fence that says if it's incremental improvement, that's not really innovation. Some people do say that. I think that if it's not aiming for transformation, it's not really innovation.
Yeah,
That's
well,
my
I sit on the same side of that fence. Enough with the tweaks.
Yes.
Let's use software and
let's
these
not twiddle the knobs
to transform some stuff.
Yeah.
Now, you formed Normative Design.
Yep.
It's 10 years now. Congratulations! I cannot believe that. We've been only a few years longer than you, but we've been on a similar kind of path towards transformation. Talk about software development. Give us a sense of traditional software development and how you've applied some of this thinking to do it differently.
Yeah, absolutely. So Normative is a design firm by choice, and the stuff we work with is software. What a lot of people don't understand is that software is a thing you can make stuff with, even if it's intangible. Doesn't have to be approached from a single perspective or way of working. Now, most software work is done with an engineering mindset. If a mindset is applied to it, which means I'm starting from a place where I know my starting criteria, I have some requirements, I have some outcomes I'm trying to achieve, and what I can do is create a thing that meets those criteria and does it in a very efficient way that gets the outcomes that I'm looking for. And that's engineering. And there's a lot of software work that really needs that approach. But just like anything else, when you are trying to create something new, you don't want to start where there's a lot of definition. You actually, it's a disadvantage to start with a well-defined problem. You actually want to go out into the messy places where there's less definition, where there's less clarity, where there's more ambiguity. And that's where a design-based approach is really, really powerful. So this idea that you can design software in the same way that you design a piece of sporting equipment or a poster or any other type of material or a house, that's newer in terms of how people think about software, but I think a really important mindset to have in your toolbox, and for an organization like us, the dominant one, because we're working in the space before the brief, before the definition. Our job is to do the work that helps create the definition of the problem to be solved, as opposed to solve the problem. So design, as you know, is a really powerful tool when applied in that type of context, because it's generative, it can help you synthesize and integrate, and it's also very evidence-driven. You build, you develop, the things that you create teach you about what you want to do next, and so it's a very learning-driven perspective as opposed to an efficiency-driven perspective. And so great software organizations, from my perspective, should be able to understand the difference between those perspectives and others, and also pick the direction the team works, or the mindset the team works with, depending on the context that they're in, right? So we're very design-driven, but you should understand that you can do both. Depending on what you do.
You also, I know, we love in the design world, we always frame our design challenges. We always start with the question, how might we?
Yes.
Right? Every presentation, how might we, ... right? You add a couple of questions to that, which increases the chances of the capability you're building of actually having traction in the real world.
Yes.
What do you add to that?
Yeah, so a lot of the classic design questions you get asked in the innovation space are what's possible and how might we? And what we're really interested in doing is going beyond that and saying, can we do this and should we do this? And the can we becomes a multi-dimensional risk management question. Do we have the capability? Does it make sense for our business or our organization? Do we understand the types of outcomes? And then that leads into the should we, which becomes a much more value-based perspective. And companies called normative for a reason. Normative means how things ought to be or how they should be. And we believe that when you're designing with something like software, you can't ignore the value judgments. And so the can we and should we as questions you need to ask when you're doing innovation work, and especially design-driven innovation work, it's critical. If you don't understand why you're doing it, maybe you shouldn't be doing it at all.
Yeah, right? I'm so stealing that.
Yeah, you absolutely. Yeah, I wish everybody would steal that.
Not just how might we, but can we and should we? Boy, if everybody asked that question from the beginning, right? Just think about how much more traction we would get. Can we come down to the focus of personalized medicine by design and a vision that says that we can enable the agency with the individual to have more influence over their own health and well-being future. In a world where it seems to me, and challenge me, that technology is being developed and capitalized through the lens of enterprises that are trying to solve the problem from the enterprise and the experts and professionals that work within the enterprise. Our sick care system. Right? And I'm trying to help us imagine a world where we as individuals have access to the information, the tools, the practices, right? And feel agency and confidence to be able to influence our own outcomes. But it doesn't seem like the world is deploying technology for that purpose. Am I right about the observation? Let's start there, and then we'll talk about how might we?
How might we, and can we, and should we? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'll say this. 40 years ago, 30 years ago, when we started collecting this type of data en masse in systems about people's personal lives, especially as it relates to health, starting to financial services and things like that. But you start collecting information for people didn't have the infrastructure to store and manage their own digital data and distribute it and everything else. And so organizations had the capital and the wherewithal, and quite frankly, the trust to become the owners of that information because it was supposed to benefit the customer. But what we've come to see is that we're now in a world where the expectation is that your data will be owned and managed by someone else. And that someone's not even a person, it's an organization, a corporation, and that information is being aggregated and sliced and diced and all kinds of things in ways in which you would never imagine. And there's still time, but less and less of it, to rethink what it looks like for people to express, like the language I used before, their information and their data to other systems to share it. You go into a doctor and you talk about how you're feeling and what's wrong with you and things like that. And there should be, in any problem-solving situation, a good conversation. And if you don't have any information that you own to share, you're not part of the conversation. You're fundamentally being entertained, technically, as opposed to participating in this. And so we're at a place right now where, especially with healthcare, it's really critical to think about what does it look like to use the technology that we have to give people back ownership and domain and agency over their data so that they can choose how to express themselves and who to express themselves to. I shouldn't be showing up at a hospital and them having all the information about me. I should be able to give them the information they need to provide me with the support I need, but it needs to be my choice. Otherwise, essentially, they have stolen a part of me and put it into their systems. And you can joke about that language being a little funny and everything else, but if we go that way another 20 or 30 years, the majority of information about you is not going to be owned by you, and in a health setting, that's quite terrifying because fundamentally for me, being successful in terms of managing your health starts with having your own information that you can manage.
Yeah,
right?
well, we're really excited about that here at BIF and are working hard at going from a conceptual model called personalized medicine by design into a prototype of a very specific use case. We've selected maternal health, particularly for Black and brown women, where I'm sure you've seen a lot of this. It's even hit the lay press, how ugly the outcomes are, how bad, I say criminal, some of the outcomes that we're seeing. And we don't think that we have to invent anything new. We just have to play with the parts and create a system, a model that will actually create agency and change the outcomes. What advice do you have for us and for the BIF community that's been watching and rolling up their sleeves to engage in this project on how we should approach that design challenge?
Yeah, I mean, I'll step back and say that in any complex system, making small changes can have very dramatic results. And the way that we look at this from a software as a system perspective is that you want to engage in a very active, design-driven test and learn approach. And so you don't have to accept the current system for what it is. What you can do is you can prototype and create and test and learn new ways of doing things. And I actually think the best way to approach this is to get down to the scale of micro prototypes, or what we call RAT tests, riskiest assumption tests. You look for what are the riskiest assumptions in the system and how can I test and validate them with software as quickly as possible so I can understand whether I can actually make change here or whether I should go somewhere else. And so what I'd suggest doing is coming up with a bunch of really small but smart hypotheses and then figure out what is the minimum amount of prototype you need to test those things and seeing what results you get back, because that will teach you way more than looking at the existing system and saying, could we change this piece or this piece or this piece? I mean, as a designer, roll up your sleeves, make something, put it out into the world and see how individuals and systems react to it. And if you start from our perspective with the riskiest stuff, you're either going to end up in a situation where you know what to avoid or where you're going to get the most opportunity for transformation. So do a RAT test, the riskiest assumptions first, test those, and then go from there. And
I love that. Really good advice. I really appreciate it. That's a keeper, the RAT test. I think that's fantastic. Let's end on, let's do a personal thing here. I know enough about you and watch on social media vicariously. You and your family are really avid skiers. Not just like everyday skiing. I mean, we're talking about serious skiing here. Tell me what you've learned that's helpful to us as innovation junkies from your experience on the slopes.
So I actually gave this talk at Johnson & Johnson yesterday.
See?
So what it has to do, this is a really straightforward question. It just builds on what we've been talking about. An intentional process in a highly complex, ambiguous environment requires that you create a relationship with the environment to learn from it. So whether that is creating a piece of software and testing how the world works, or putting your skis on edge on a 60-degree slope to try and figure out how that works, you're not going to get the type of feedback that drives what I call the return on learning without getting into the world and getting active. And so we love skiing for a lot of different reasons, but one of the things is that it forces a form of environmental learning that is really underappreciated in the world, and I would look at approaching innovation the same way. Innovation is not something you do in a lab, it's something you do out in the world. You get super active, and you literally have to put your skis onto the snow in order to figure out whether they're gonna stick or not. It's the same with innovation. Get out of the office, get into the world and test and learn. That's the only way you're going to improve, especially in an environment that's constantly changing. So
that's fantastic.
For me, it's all the same thing.
Yeah. Well, I didn't know that I'm not surprised that you've been asked that question, just given how intensely active you are at skiing. But I knew and gave you great credit for having a good answer for it. And I wanted to know what the answer was. Thank you for sharing it. Matthew, thank you for joining me in the Business Model Sandbox.
Thank you for having me.
Really,
Always
really
a pleasure.
helpful and really excited to be connected with you. And thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate it.